Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Curtis Hayes. My official title is a senior planner for the town of Brookline. And I work in the town's Department of Planning and Community Development. And actually, I work kind of half and half. Half of my job is spent on land development for the planning board, doing zoning and land development. And the other half is working with the Selectmen's Climate Action Committee and working on energy planning and climate initiatives. And climate action is such a huge issue. It's kind of hard to narrow it down. And I look at the overall question is, how do we change how we live and work so that we reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases, thereby slowing climate change, as well as how do we become ready to adapt to what's already an inevitably changing environment? So the problems that I see every day, and I thought of three, there's lots of them, but the ones that I thought of the most were one, that there's really limited resources, both as far as staff and money to put towards climate change. We have a real need for leadership at all levels, and we really have a lack of accurate data to deal with the problem. As far as limited resources, I say resources and I mean both staff time, volunteer time, and money. You know, climate change and adaptation involves so many different sectors. It involves, you know, transportation issues. It involves building energy issues. It involves food systems planning, you know, huge. And so that many, you know, those many issues all deal with climate change, but we just don't have enough people or time to deal with them all. And so there's lots of problems, not enough people or money to address them. And it's really been a slow kind of movement towards working on energy issues. And that's kind of how we really do it. It's not climate issues, it's really energy planning. It's really dealing with energy, and, you know, both for the municipal buildings as well as the community. The town both has a constituency that cares about climate change, and they really push that, and they have a constituency that really doesn't think it's an issue. And we really have to listen to everyone. And basically, usually the ones that don't really think it's an issue kind of win out. But when it comes to the money part of it, the funding that we have for our projects are all money that we've applied for from grants. We applied for outside funding, and that usually comes from the federal level or the state level. And our major funding source was from the federal government recently. It was about $500,000 from the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Fund. And that program just did not get renewed. So discussions at the federal level, which I'm sure you all have heard about regarding, you know, the debt limit and that kind of stuff, do really come down and trickle down and affect the local government. So now, you know, I've had two sources of grant funding, now I have one that I can really deal with. And so constantly looking for money and resources. And that goes for also volunteers. I depend so much on volunteers to implement our programs that, you know, that's really key. Because I'm only working on this part-time. And so it's a constant kind of battle. The other challenge I really see was a need for leadership. I can't emphasize enough that programs don't happen without a who in front doing that. You know, the who is just as important as the what. Somebody who is willing to be out there and be a champion for your program is really key. You know, leaders get programs. They don't necessarily start the programs, but they're the ones that will stand up for the programs, and they're the ones that will work for the money or will help funnel money to your program. And these leaders keep climate change in the public discourse, keep it talked about. And without that, you know, it kind of gets forgotten. And so I really think that the who is just as important as the what. And then my third problem that I'd like to talk about is the lack of accurate data issue. And accurate data really makes it a lot easier to convince people that there's actually a problem and that changing their behavior would make a difference. But by trying to show data that this does matter and this will, you know, this saves this many tons of greenhouse gases, and trying to making that into a visual thing that they can relate to, really helps. But it also makes it easier, accurate data also makes it easier for policymakers to decide what they should spend their money on and their time on and what they should support. So, you know, having data to back up, you know, what's really going to work and what's not going to work really helps your cause. So accurate data is something that I run up to, against all the time because we may not have the information or it may not be readily available. And as far as how the community could help, how people might help, I'm sure you've all heard this before, but I can't emphasize it enough. The get involved is key. If you're interested in this issue, picking a program or starting one of your own, a campaign, and really pushing it, I think is the #1 way to get involved. All of these programs depend on volunteers, and we're constantly looking for somebody new or somebody to help with us. It was always also to keep pressure on leaders at all levels to keep climate change in the forefront of discourse. After a while, people get kind of tired of hearing about the same issue all the time, and so you'll see issues kind of, you know, go up and fade away, and then usually some new story or something brings it back into the forefront. But keeping pressure on leaders to keep climate change an issue so that when we have a new program come out and we want funding for it, it's more likely that we'll get it. This either means keeping pressure on leaders or you becoming a leader yourself, taking out your own program. Like I said, regarding the lack of accurate data, this one I think is really tough, and I don't have a whole lot of ideas on how to deal with it. Besides data sharing between agencies to encourage people to do that, encourage private entities to share their data, but you have to keep in mind privacy protections. And I think that's a real problem. I think that's why I always have this problem is trying to figure out how to get more data out there and make it more readily available and get people to share it, agencies and people for minimal costs. As far as information sources for you all to research, EPA just came out with a great 2012 indicators report, which has fantastic data, pretty graphs and pictures to kind of demonstrate where we are as far as climate change and some of the possible risks. It's a really helpful source and kind of gives you an opportunity to kind of ground yourself. There's a number of organizations that are interested in this kind of stuff. The Department of Energy has a lot of good programs and information out there. There are a lot of local groups working on this issue. Climate Action Brookline is a nonprofit in town. And while there's a lot of overlap between what they work on and what we work on, and we work on a lot of stuff together, their goals are a little bit different than ours, and their constituency is a little bit different from us. So I would really recommend talking with them. And then I would also recommend talking to other cities and towns. Is there any questions? I feel like I just threw a bunch of things at you and chatted. Sure.
How would you compare the importance of education about the climate with the importance of implementing specific changes?
I often try to find multiple ways to educate people about it. So in most of my programs, getting people to participate, if you can hit the pocketbook, it's the #1 motivator. But they also will feel good about it if you can say that actually by doing this is, you know, going to help you.
You mentioned the idea of energy efficient behaviors, that a lot of the work that needs to be done is to change people's behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us more of a sense of what kinds of behaviors need to be changed?
Sure. As far as energy efficient behaviors, we think about, I always am encouraging people to turn down the thermostat, though I get cold, and put on a sweater. That kind of basic stuff, little things like that can make a big difference. Energy efficient behaviors always come with transportation. I want you to, you know, ride your bike or walk as much as possible. Take public transit. That's, you know, these things you hear a lot, but you have to try to make them more accessible to people. Why do people not want to ride their bike because they don't feel safe. And so how do you address that? It always comes around to something else. So encouraging people to do it is one thing, but also making it realistic option for them to do it as well. And yeah.
What is the difference in saving energy riding the bus and driving a car? And if people were to start taking the MBTA more than driving, is there a way that the MBTA would move faster or something like that, so people can actually get to work on time? Because that's a big reason why a lot of people don't take public transportation.
Completely agree with you. As far as the energy savings difference, it really depends on how far you would normally drive your car, obviously, and how many people you can get on that bus and they're actually going to take it. Because, you know, the bus itself uses a lot of energy, and if only one person's riding it, which I'm sure we've all seen the bus go by with 2 people on it, then that's not really saving energy either, right? But so that's really kind of a case by case. You'd have to look at, you know, how much you're going to drive and how much you're going to save. But as far as, you know, yeah, the T is, you know, if I were to take the T here, it would take me twice as long to get here as it would to drive, and you got to think about everyday, realistic, you know, things that people have to deal with. So how do you improve the T to make it work better? You know, and I think that's a really common complaint. I think in the end, by giving people more options to use something other than a car, you are saving energy in the long run. A lot of what climate change, I think, was really about changing your attitudes and changing people's perceptions about what they can and can't do, and making, the more times you have these, you know, car-free options available, the more routine it you know, gets you to think outside of the car box, like I would say, you know? So, yeah.
How much work have you guys done, if any, with local high school and college groups? Because I know that students in general tend to be more aware of climate change issues.
The one that I can think of most recently was a local student group, high school students came in, I believe it was last year, to push for retrofitting of the diesel vehicles. And actually, I remember they came to my Climate Action Committee and presented, because they were presenting a warrant article for the town meeting. And in the end, I know that actually a committee has currently been created just in the last month to really look at how to actually implement their goal to have all of the diesel vehicles retrofitted. That's the most recent thing I can think of. I know that when that group came to my committee, they were really, it was exciting to see some high school kids that really knew what they were talking about. It was great. And my committee asked them some tough questions and they did a great job. So I think they were really pleased by that. Well, thank you guys. Thank you very much.